podcast you're about to listen to is from a book series on post-qualitative, new materialist, and critical post-humanist research. I'm Karen Murris and chief editor of this new Routledge series. You can find it on the following website, www.postqualitativeresearch.com.
Chapter 10. Oceanic Swimming, Writing, Thinking for Justice to Come Scholarship, written by Tamara Shefer, Viv Bozalek, and Nikki Romano. We've decided to introduce this chapter by asking and responding to questions about how our practices came about and what they mean for us and our scholarship.
So how did our swimming, writing, thinking practice that we are working with in this chapter come about? Viv?
Thanks, Tammy. My involvement in swimming, writing, thinking emanated from other collaborative practices. Earlier on, I'd been involved in a group on socially just pedagogies across a couple of higher education institutions, and some present and past PhD students of mine were part of this group. From then, we started using concepts to free write with, after which we did walking and free writing, which then morphed into swimming and free writing. What happened with all of these groups was that we would open a Google Doc and all write collaboratively on that document, and then read our writings aloud to each other, which would then spark further conversations. I remember, Tammy, that you seemed a little reluctant to swim and free write, thinking it would just add to your already heavy workload and commitments. But I think once you started, you really seemed to love the process and you got into it.
Yeah, my practice came about through both my personal and my scholarly interests. I'm privileged to live very close to a sea that I've swum in daily for many years now, notwithstanding whether it's winter or summer. I always found swimming very helpful also for my thinking. I recall doing my PhD in the 1990s when I swam only in a public pool as I lived too far from the sea. And I found it so helpful to take a problem to the water. I would kind of be thinking about how to kind of take this chapter forward and what was my argument, and things would just sort of start emerging and clarifying. When I began moving towards thinking differently about what it means to do research and teach and learn, working especially with decolonial feminism and attempting to disrupt dominant colonial logics like the Cartesian dualism that shapes everything in the university, and beginning to work with situated, relational, embodied, and effective knowledges together with others like Viv, it seemed a seamless move for me into thinking with the ocean and water. I recall so well the first teaching and learning workshop we had near sea and a lagoon, where we included a swimming methodology workshop, and been so amazed at the really rich material that emerged when a group of people swam or even paddled and wrote and thought together, and how it spoke to so many issues related to, our historical trauma in this country and current crises of both human and more than human and planet conditions. I guess we were really surprised when we began reading and writing in this area how much was already going on in research and activism around oceans and water that took our own writing forward.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Tammy, because I remember that workshop at Onrust, which translates as Onrust, and it was my family holiday place. I remember my grandfather lived there, and how the different hauntings manifested depending on our positionality. It was very, very powerful. But back to writing, for many years I've done the morning pages, so free writing is something I know well. But the big shift happened when I started doing my PhD under Viv's supervision. And it was at this time that I joined various reading groups, and we started reading, writing together, and reading, walking, writing together, as Viv has already described. Similarly, I've always been a recreational sea swimmer, and it was only when I started the PhD journey as well that I began to explore these different practices as thinking, doing practices. And in this case, I became increasingly interested in and grateful for how swimming, reading, writing practice, or how our swimming, reading, writing practice carried me during the making of the PhD. In writing with our swimming encounters, I began to understand and articulate my concerns more clearly, and it was through the swimming writing reading sessions that I was able to find the words.
Thanks for those responses to the first question. I'm going to go on to the second question, which is, can we think about what the process meant for us and also still means for us, and what do we find particularly surprising about it?
Thanks, Viv. For me, it's been really wonderful and enriching to begin thinking with others about the ocean and to begin reading the amazing scholarship and engaging also with artistic and activist practices that are similarly working with the ocean for change, both locally and internationally. Also, swimming together, reading together, writing together has been surprisingly rewarding and productive. As Viv said earlier, I was somewhat anxious to take on another, clear commitment, but I've been really surprised at how much I've learned through our more structured swimming, reading, writing together. But for me, it made more time and space available to do this. It was also a particular comfort in the time of COVID isolation that we could come together in one way or another with this shared practice and feel the comfort of our shared swimming, reading, writing, even when we had to do that online.
Thanks, Tammy. I remember it being very important during COVID for all of us to escape from our isolation. But actually, all three activities remain very important to me. I love writing collaboratively with others and hearing their take on things in relation to mine. And I have always loved swimming, especially sea swimming. But it's only been over the past couple of years that I have done it every day and right through summer and winter. Walking or swimming allows one to contemplate things which matter. What was completely new to me, and I think to all of us, was the access that we got to the psychedelic, vertiginous world under the sea through snorkeling and free diving, which was really quite mind-blowing. Taking photographs enabled detailed and close-up visions, which one couldn't see with the naked eye. The combination of the swimming, writing, thinking was surprising, as often we were thinking of similar things, resonating with each other without any prompts to do so. Another surprise is the intimacy that such practices bring about to oceanic encounters and to human and more than human interactions.
I'm glad that you brought up COVID. Both of you have mentioned it. And when I rewatch our video, I'm moved by how we share our experiences of the COVID pandemic. I was surprised by how our sessions became a kind of lifeline, whereby we stayed connected with each other and more than human others. And I remember the one session during the hard lockdown where we were not allowed to go to the beaches, and we met online and we met online, and we kind of swam together in the Google Doc, pretty much like we're doing today, all in our own homes. I found that to be very comforting. I'm also astounded by how our writing flowed into each other's writing, and our shared experiences in the water would spill onto the Google page. This was further compounded by our reading aloud together, and your voices became voices in my head, and it was as if the three of us had entered each other's heads and bodies in a very watery way.
Wow, Nikki. And that really speaks to the issues that we're also writing about, our sense of our entanglements with each other, with other species in the planet, and how swimming disrupts that separate unitary self that we're taught to believe in. So a final question for us is, how has this practice permeated our scholarly practice in general?
Well, nowadays I struggle to separate scholarly practice from swimming. I find I consciously take thoughts for a swim, but not in a formulaic way. It's best described as tossing an idea or a question into the sea and allowing the ripple effects to permeate obliquely, interactively. I found that our careful and attentive diffractive swimming, writing, reading practice generated a language about process that made sense. In other words, the iterative traces, or those iterative traces, continue to materialize opportunities for sense making in my scholarly practice in general. I really hope I'm not making this sound like it's smooth sailing, excuse the pun, because it's not. It's much more like a trust that the water will carry me even when I feel as if I'm adrift or drowning at sea.
And sometimes we do. I think one of the things we've also written about is our precarity in the ocean, what that raises for us. Well, this practice has shifted my own scholarship hugely. It's almost a paradigm shift. It's been really inspiring to experiment with and then write about practices that we've been arguing for in our efforts to reconceptualize our education. It also made me take my own scholarship far more deeply into a concern with environmental challenges, always, of course, key to feminist concerns from an early point if we look back at ecofeminism of the 60s. But on the other hand, I'd spent much of my career researching human concerns, such as sexuality and young people, in the light of challenges such as HIV and gender violence, without realizing the entanglements of all forms of binary and all forms of violence, and the role that human exceptionalism plays in this. Beginning to read the now large body of work in feminist new materialism and coming back to materiality from the discursive turn was really important for my current work. There's perhaps no better way, at least for me, than sea swimming with reading and writing together for the necessary shift of my scholarship towards speaking more to a deep sense of shared relationalities and responsibilities for all to survive and thrive on planet Earth.
Thanks, Tammy. I agree with all that. I continue to swim every day and I feel very out of sorts if I'm not able to. The immersion in the ocean brings new delights every day. I've also continued to write with different groups of people in different ways, sometimes synchronously and sometimes asynchronously, sometimes geographically distant and others together, and sometimes on writing and swimming retreats, and other times just casually meeting and writing together. What we've also been doing is swimming and reading books aloud to each other while drinking coffee after the swim. This is also a very pleasurable experience. Sometimes we also have a swim, do reading of a text and then write about the text. All these practices I see as a form of slow scholarship, which encourages us to cultivate the ability to pay attention, to attune to what matters, to be responsible, and to render each other capable.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to know more about this chapter, please visit the website www.postqualitativeresearch.com. And please stay tuned for future podcasts.